tanker runs aground off the Welsh coast. Some 4,000 tons of crude oil have leaked into the sea. The Liberian-registered Sea Empress is believed to have leaked more than 4,000 tons of crude oil into the sea, creating a slick 5 miles long. The accident happened at the entrance to Milford Haven harbour. There are reports of oil coming ashore in some places, raising fears for wildlife at several nature reserves in the area, including bird sanctuaries on the islands of Skoma and Stockholm. Our correspondent Juliet Bremner is at the scene.
15 hours after the Liberian-registered vessel came aground, the port authorities and the marine rescue teams believe that they have managed to stabilise her and stop the oil gushing from her damaged hull. However, the battle to stop the oil coming ashore has only just begun. The Sea Empress was attempting to steer her cargo of crude North Sea oil towards the Texaco terminal at Milford Haven when she hit the rocks. The damage was immediate and at first appeared catastrophic, as thousands of tons of crude oil gushed into the waterway. 10 out of the ship's 18 tanks had been ruptured, but the company that owned her were quick to dismiss suggestions that the steering had failed.
Both the master and the pilot have confirmed that the main engine propulsion and the steering gear were fully operational before and after the incident, so there was no failure of the steering gear.
Tugs were brought to the scene to try and stabilise the ship, while booms were lowered into the water to prevent the slick from spreading. Marine pollution experts now want to try and remove any oil remaining on board. The stretch of water is home to a vast array of seabirds and grey seals. There are fears that the oil may cause long-term damage.
The birds are coming back towards the colonies during this period, the late winter period, as we approach the spring, and will be scattered over a very wide sea area and very vulnerable to oil pollution in these circumstances.
The 4,000 tons of oil is now thought to cover an area of 1 square mile and is moving eastwards along the coastline.
The operation to salvage the tanker Sea Empress that ran aground off the coast of West Wales went badly wrong tonight. The vessel, which still has more than 100,000 tons of oil on board, was being repositioned to ride out gales forecast later this evening when a tow rope apparently snapped. It hit the rocks again off Milford Haven, and now there are fears of an explosion. Half those on board have already been lifted off by rescue helicopters, and people living around St Anne's Head are being evacuated.
Aground again, but now the Sea Empress is broadside to the gale. The wind is strengthening, and it's forecast to reach force 8 around midnight. 2 Royal Naval Sea King helicopters are helping to evacuate the ship. They'll leave a skeleton crew aboard to ride out the storm. The fire brigade has cleared the headland overlooking the ship, warning the public to stay away because of the danger of an explosion caused by gas escaping from the tanker. The Sea Empress still has 130,000 tons of crude oil aboard. A plan to pump it off into a second tanker had to be abandoned early this morning. An estimated 250 tons have already escaped, the thick, sticky oil washing onto the beaches. A clean-up had already begun this morning, and a handful of birds, first casualties of the oil slick, were found. The environmental damage had looked less than at first feared, but with the ship aground again, the threat is now very real. At least 35 people have been safely taken off the ship, and lifeboats are standing by.
It was too risky to leave salvage workers on board the Sea Empress as the light failed and with it the brief spell of fair weather. Earlier on, the weather and tide had shown no mercy as winds of up to 60 miles per hour tossed the ship back onto the rocks. The result was predictable, but nonetheless devastating, as oil once again gushed from the tanker.
She is leaking. It's heavier than it was this morning. We don't have a rate yet, but it appears to be coming from 2 discrete areas.
The evidence on the beaches is causing further consternation amongst environmentalists. It may be Thursday before the weather is calm enough to stem the flow of oil. Because of the gales forecast tonight, it'll remain a holding operation for the immediate future, with the sole objective to keep the ship steady through the night.
Good evening. A last-ditch attempt has just begun to try to refloat the stricken tanker Sea Empress stuck on rocks off the southwest coast of Wales. She has now lost around 50,000 tonnes of oil, a third of her cargo, and the rest is likely to spill out if this latest rescue attempt fails. The sheer scale of the disaster in an area of outstanding natural beauty has triggered a huge clean-up operation to try to minimise the environmental impact. The tanker ran aground again last night off St Anne's Head, spilling more oil. Conservationists say the slick has now surrounded the island nature reserves of Skomer and Stockholm, which are home to seals and thousands of seabirds.
By midday, some 50,000 tonnes of oil had been lost to sea. During the afternoon, thousands more tonnes poured out of the stricken tanker. The ship is grounded on rocks, wedged under the centre of her hull, leaving the bow and stern free to shift up and down in backbreaking movement on the tide. Oil slicks stretch miles out to sea, kept offshore only by the strong winds, and it's the weather that's been beating the salvage team.
While they've had a fleet of tugs here and they've all the equipment that they should have had, the ship's beaten them in this case. She's wandered about almost at will. It's been extremely difficult to control.
Chemical dispersants are being sprayed to try and break up some of the slicks, and while there's hope that the tanker may yet be saved, the police have once again evacuated the area.
Local conservationists have accused the authorities of not doing enough to contain the slick. Our correspondent Rachel Morgan has travelled out to the island reserve of Skomer to assess the dangers facing wildlife there.
Environmentalists out on the Ocean Defender surveying the protected habitats of Skomer Island. Hundreds of black-backed gulls are now returning to the oil-rimmed rocks to breed. These initial inspections proved better than expected. But turning back to land, a 5-mile oil slick pouring from the starboard side of the Sea Empress flowed right across our path.
I have been in the petrochemical industry for about 25 years, and I have never seen a slick that was, to be honest with you, it was not controlled. There did not seem to be any booms around it. The only thing that was being done to prevent the slick from going anywhere was spraying by aircraft, and it just seemed to be totally out of control.
Behind me is Freshwater West, one of the most beautiful beaches in this area. But around here the water is oily, the spray is coming up brown, and the slick is extending right out. There seems very little chance now that the whole of this south coast won't be contaminated.
Sortie after sortie of Dakota are still spraying the slick. But after 6 days of watching and waiting for some positive results, local wildlife experts are now at a loss.
I'm appalled. We've come through a huge slick of oil. There's a massive quantity of oil leaked out, and we've seen the planes going over one after the other, spraying dispersant on it. I mean, that's another poisonous substance being thrown into the sea on top of the oil.
A huge salvage operation tonight managed to float the tanker Sea Empress clear of the rocks where it's been stranded off the Welsh coast. 12 tugs are towing it to a safer location where the remaining oil in its holds can be offloaded to another tanker. But more than 60,000 tonnes of crude have already spewed into the sea. Latest reports say thick oil has spread nearly 20 miles to the east, reaching Carmarthen Bay, and a thinner slick has moved miles out to sea.
At about 7 o'clock this evening, the Sea Empress broke free, hauled off the rocks that had trapped her. The crews on the salvage tugs will hope to tow her to safety and unload her remaining oil. Even if they succeed, she's already shed 70,000 tonnes and is still losing oil fast. Pressure sprayers wash down one of the few beaches where oil has come ashore, but small road tankers like this are no match for the Sea Empress. The ship's leaking tens of thousands of tonnes of oil. Here, they measure the clean-up in gallons.
About 8,000 on Monday and about 6,000 to 8,000 yesterday.
Among the oil's first casualties is this duck. It's been lucky, but the local rescue centre says that if the number of oil birds reaches, as expected, hundreds or thousands, they'll have to send them to the RSPCA in Somerset.
We've only got 2 washing stations, and as you've seen, washing the birds, they can take from an hour to an hour and a half for each bird. So if you have hundreds of birds, that's, as you see, we just we just could not cope with them.
The local fishermen are already suffering. Their boats sit idle in harbour. Foreign buyers don't want contaminated shellfish in a market worth 20 million a year. Now there's a voluntary ban on fishing, the oil boom a token barrier between boats and sea.
It is a disaster for them at this stage. They're going to suffer terribly. The future does not look good for them at all.
For the crews on the salvage tugs, tonight's success is a reward for 6 days and nights of constant danger and hard work. But for their managers, the recriminations about why there were so many bungled rescue attempts are just beginning.
Over the last few days, the priority of the authorities has been simply to get the ship off the rocks. That's understandable from some points of view, but actually that has been at the expense of pouring the oil into the environment. So it's clear that saving the ship has been more important than trying to save the cargo and protect the environment.
Hundreds more seabirds covered in oil from the tanker Sea Empress have been washed up on beaches all round the Pembrokeshire coast. There's now a heavy oil slick hugging the coast around Milford Haven. A light sheen of oil stretches from Ramsey Island to Carmarthen Bay and north of Lundy Island. One of the worst hit areas is Pendine Sands, near the holiday resort of Tenby.
The extent of the pollution was illustrated clearly today along the whole of the Carmarthen Bay, with beaches around Tenby particularly affected. Some of the worst areas are 20 miles from the original spillage. Hundreds of birds have been left stranded, others have been rescued and taken to treatment centres, but for many it was too late. When they saw the oil washed up in thick black streaks this morning, local people were quick to join in the clean-up operation.
He was up on top of the beach, right up the beach, and this one's dead.
There was a similar picture on the island of Lundy off the North Devon coast. The Marine Nature Reserve is a nesting site for thousands of seabirds, and many were just beginning to return to the steep cliffs to breed.
Well, I came down very early this morning. It was high tide, and sort of in a line along the shore there were guillemots, oil guillemots really, all the way along the shore.
Meanwhile, pumping has started at the source of the spillage, the Sea Empress. The remaining oil in her tanks is being transferred to a smaller vessel, the Starboard. It's expected to take at least 28 hours. Tonight, the Labour MP for Pembroke, Nick Ainger, claimed that some of the worst damage could have been avoided if the salvagers had acted on advice given by the pilot of the Sea Empress at key stages of the rescue operation. But as salvage efforts continue, the full cost to wildlife is only just being realised.